Hey, hello. Welcome back to SIParator for AWS online training. Uh, we're about to begin the session number 8, configuring SIParator SIP services. Okay, now we are going to go through the most important sections needed to set up all SIP related um, attributes. Uh, you see here there are three specific tags, main tags associated to SIP. The one that is called SIP services, which is the one that we're going to start with. Then you have a SIP traffic, which has to do with everything associated to routing SIP traffic. And SIP trunks, which is a specific section for trunking. Um, so let's begin with SIP services. The first thing that we are going to do is make sure that the SIP module is enabled. If we are using the SIParator just as a firewall, uh, you may not want to use the SIP module and you can disable. So we go to basic section inside the SIP services and we enable the SIP module. Okay, let me just select the laser pointer. Okay. Uh, the next thing you're going to need, you can select here on the uh, signaling access control and define only one interface where you want to accept SIP traffic. But in our case, we're going to be accepting SIP traffic in any interface, so no selection is made here. Then the SIP signaling ports. Here is where you define which ports are going to be used to listen uh, for voice traffic. Even UDP, traditional standard SIP traffic. It could be TCP also, or TLS, or WebSockets, or also web secure sockets. So you have about 5 different options. You select the port. You can activate or deactivate any of them. Um, Intercept is going to usually be enabled. This is to intercept all the traffic associated to that port. You can put a comment here just to remember what this port is for. Um, Here, it is important in the case of Amazon because, as you remember, we are the in-gate is acting as a device on the uh, public subnet and is being NATed one-to-one with a public IP address. So that public IP address needs to be announced here. So whatever the Elastic's IP address you assign to the Ethernet 0 interface in the in-gate, that public IP address needs to be here. This is how the in-gate will be able to do the replacements on the SIP headers when the traffic is going out. And that's going to solve the near and transversal. So also there is an interesting section here where you can add all the different SIP destinations that you want to test proof for availability. And what the ingate is going to do is going to start sending SIP options traffic in order to confirm that those endpoints or termination points are active and listening. Okay? So this is typical for carriers. If you have a SIP proxy IP addresses on carriers where you are sending traffic or from where you are receiving traffic, you can put those addresses here. Or your PBX to detect if the PBX is down or up. Okay, this is the important section in terms of monitoring. Um, Before I forget, there is a When you don't remember what is the IP address, the public IP address you want to or you need to put here, you can always go to the About page and look into the section that is called Cloud Service Information, and you will see that address here. Okay. Now the next thing is we are going to enable remote SIP connectivity, and this is because one of the things that our Ingate will do is enable the possibility of remote extensions. Um, and one of the challenges, the typical challenge we face when we have remote extensions, besides security challenges, is remote NAT transversal. In order to do so, what you need to do is go to the remote SIP connectivity under the SIP services. We are not going to use Stone. We are not going to use the Ingate as an Stone server, but we are going to enable the remote NAT transversal. And here, the only parameters you need to change is you may want to decide if the media will be directly uh, routed between clients that are behind the same NAT, for example, to um, save bandwidth or avoid bandwidth constraints affecting the quality of audio for calls between two extensions on the same office. Uh, this is going to work only if the PBX is not forcing to relay the media. Okay. And finally, here there is an unconditional NAT transversal. You can enforce always to remote NAT transversal in any remote extension, and you can add a table of exceptions. Or you can just enable this option that says only use remote NAT transversal when client looks like NAT. Okay. So this is a remote SIP connectivity. Now we are going inside the same SIP traffic section. Inside the same SIP traffic section, we are going to use routing. This is a very important configuration point because if you are providing access to the PBX for remote extensions, the way how the ingate is will be able to detect that a SIP request needs to be routed to the PBX is using the domain name. Whatever comes in the domain name in the SIP request, let's say a SIP invite or SIP registrar, uh, will be matched on this table. And if the domain matches, then the relay will be made to, in this case, the PBX. This section is known as a DNS override for SIP requests. And it's called because DNS override because what it's really doing is acting as a DNS, is a local DNS server, right? It's routing to a specific IP address, and you can relay defining a protocol for the relay, and that is interesting because that is going to change the protocol. If you are getting the traffic request the request using TLS and you relay using UDP, the conversion is going to be automatic. You can decide if you want to modify or not the request URI. And also there is another section here called the SIP routing order. Uh, you can leave that as the default values, but you can, in some exceptional cases, you may want to change how the SIParator is going to uh, decide what to do first in terms of applying rules of routing. For example, the way it is organized by default is first local registrar, second DNS override, third dial plan. So that means that if the ingate gets a SIP request, the first thing that it's going to do is check if that request is being sent to some destination that is locally registered on the ingate. If it is not, then it's going to check if there is any matching domain on the DNS override to decide what to do. And if it is not, then it will send the call to the dial plan to decide what to do with the call. Okay, so those are the main sections on this routing under SIP traffic. Okay, next thing is to do the configuration of the trunks. Um, Besides the remote access that we already enabled for remote extensions, now we need to enable SIP trunking in order to provide PSTN connectivity to the PBX. In our exercise, in our example, we are going to show three, like having two or three ITSPs. And the section that we are going to show is what we call the SIP trunk groups. It's one of the most powerful and easy to configure sections. Simplifies a lot whatever is needed to route calls between the PBX and the uh, service providers. Um, a SIP trunk group, by definition, means a route, a path between an ITSP and an IPPBX. Um, you can have any match that you want. You can have several ITSPs that are routed to the same PBX, or you can have a single ITSP that may be routed to more than one PBX. So any options are possible. The important thing, let me show you the a specific live case. Okay, these are our live example. We are on the SIP trunk group page. Okay, and here you're gonna have a pull down to see all the SIP trunks. As you can see, there I have we have 4 SIP trunks configured here, but and I have some others that are not even configured at all. This equipment, this eGate has been licensed for 19 SIP trunks. So if I go to let's take for example Twilio, and I press go to SIP trunk page. Okay, you're going to see several sections here. I want to explain. Let me there are three main sections here. Well, of course, you can enable or disable the SIP trunk. In this case, the SIP trunk number 4. Then we have the SIP trunk service. This section describes all the attributes to the specific connection to the carrier. Okay, here we have, for example, we assign a name, what is the service provider domain, um, if we're going to restrict the calls to some specific origin. This is one name assigned to the on the network names and computers. You can define the protocol, what is going to come on the from header domain, the provider domain or the enterprise domain, etc. Here are some other attributes. You can read over all of them. Most of them are the default values that came with the default configuration are the most typical use, but you may need to change depending on how the specifications from the carrier are provided. There is another section here that has three um, uh, areas. This section is related to basically the routing of the calls. Okay, I'm gonna came back to this one here, but I want to go to the last one, which is the PBX. As you can see, the first one shows the configuration looking at the carrier, and the last one shows the configuration looking at the PBX. As you can see, it says use PBX from another SIP trunk. So if you have one PBX and that PBX is being used by more than one carrier, you're going to have more than one SIP trunk. But you don't need to define the PBX every time you define the zip trunk. You can just refer to and already define it in another zip trunk PBX. But if you define a new PBX, you have to assign a name, and then there are some attributes associated to that PBX. What is the IP address, etc. You can read over all of them. But in our case, we are using an existing one, which is this one here. Okay, so here we have this, as I mentioned before, I'm coming back to this section where we have three different sections or areas. Main trunk line, PBX lines, and zip lines. Okay. Uh, the main trunk line is a kind of a definition of the trunk leg facing the carrier. And the PBX line is kind of the definition of the trunk leg facing the, um, the PBX. You can also see here that we have, in all of them, we have an outgoing call section, an outgoing call section. We have an authentication section in each one of them, okay? And we have an incoming section. So here we are going to use the incoming to match inbound calls with DIDs and decide how are they to be routed to the PBX. For example, here I'm saying if I get calls with this caller ID plus 141, etc., etc., I want to route the call to the PBX with this number. Whatever you put here is how the SIP invite is going to be built when sending to this PBX here. And the outgoing calls are attributes that are going to be used when you are making outbound calls. In the outbound calls, whatever the PBX has on the from PBX, for example, you are making a phone call from one extension, okay? Most likely what is going to come is the extension number. But you don't want to show as a caller ID on the outbound call an extension number. You want to put a caller ID. You may want to change here the display name, the username, or the identity when the call is being sent out. And you can here what we are using in reality in this example is whatever we are capturing from the on the from header from the SIP invite, we just are translating that to the same on each one of these three parameters. So you can use regular expression here if you want. So, okay, let me go back to the, okay, this is what I was explaining. We already went over all this. Okay. Uh, the next component, here is what I was explaining in the on the attributes that we can use on these three specific, in this case, the main trunk line and the PBX line, how the calls are going to be routed based on DIDs, okay? Um, here is the section of the PBX that we already mentioned. And that completes all the main SIP configuration needs for the use case in our AWS deployment. Again, as usual, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to send an email to trainingquestions@ingate.com. So hope to see you on the next session. Goodbye.